Did you know that women weren't just silent followers in the early days of Christianity, but powerful leaders, teachers, and even martyrs? Yet many of their names have been forgotten, or worse, erased. The early church was filled with women who shaped the faith. Take Phoebe, mentioned by St. Paul himself, a deaconess entrusted to carry his letters, or Priscilla, who taught the faith alongside her husband Aquila, even correcting the great preacher Apollos. These weren't passive figures, they were active voices in spreading the gospel. History also remembers Lydia, a wealthy businesswoman who opened her home as one of the first Christian house churches. And then there are countless female martyrs like Perpetua and Felicity, who faced death with courage, inspiring generations of believers. So what happened? As the church grew, women's visible roles began to shrink. Over time, their contributions were overshadowed, their leadership downplayed. But the truth remains. Women were there at the very heart of the movement, risking everything for the faith. Think about it. In a time when society expected women to be seen and not heard, they became some of the earliest preachers of the new faith. They weren't afraid to speak up. They weren't afraid to teach. They weren't afraid to lead. And men, including some of the most prominent apostles, listened to them. Can you imagine the courage it took for a woman in those times to stand up and teach in a church? It was a bold move. It went against the grain. But these women weren't just teaching, they were serving, they were leading, and they did it with excellence. So why are their stories so little known? Why have their contributions been minimized over time? The answer, my friends, is a complex one. Some would argue that it's because the early church was patriarchal, that women's voices were systematically silenced and erased from the narrative. Others would say that it's simply because their stories haven't been passed down to us. But I believe there's something more here, something more profound. I believe that women's roles were intentionally downplayed as the church grew, as the roles became more rigid and defined. Their stories were pushed aside, their leadership minimized. But I refuse to let that happen. Today, we remember and celebrate the women of the early church, not just as followers, but as leaders, teachers, and martyrs. Their faith was bold, their courage was unwavering, and their contributions are invaluable. So let us ask ourselves this. If we have forgotten their stories, if we have minimized their roles, let us commit to remembering, acknowledging, and celebrating the women of the early church who dared to lead, who dared to teach, who dared to live out their faith in a world that tried to silence them. Let their stories be a reminder, a challenge, and an inspiration to us all.